Okay, well, the camera is running.
Yeah, good. Okay, it's December 3rd, 2009. Where am I? Who am I? Patricia McGrath, and our camera person is Bob Herzog. And we're here with Dr. Ken Williams at 1916 Mitchell-Trina Street. So, shall we start the interview? Dr. Ken, maybe you could talk a little bit about coming here from, or where you were born,
Yeah.
and when you were born.
Actually, I was born in Wales with my Welsh parents, and it was during the Depression. And she had 3 children. I was the oldest of 3 sons. And because of the Depression in the coal mines in 1929, we migrated to America, New York City. And my dad, being his main skill was coal mining, that he became a longshoreman on the docks of New York City. And the docks were a very difficult place to survive. And if you saw the movie with Marlon Brando on the waterfront, you would get an impression of what it was like to be a longshoreman with the control by the gangsters and the mobs.
I just watched that movie about 2 months ago again. It's a good movie.
Good movie.
A little depressing.
Yeah. And it turned out my youngest brother was born in New York City, so there was now 4 of us. And we all went to the public schools in New York City.
What did,
Grew up
Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt. Did you say what year you were born?
in May 1925.
Okay.
So I was a little bit over 4 years old when we left Wales. And then it turned out my aunt and uncle in New York City, who was my mother's oldest sister, they were the ones that funded our passage on the Canard line. And so it was a major step for my parents, but they did it mainly for the children, although my father didn't really want to leave Wales. And so we really spent our childhood in New York in the public schools, lived in the tenement housing in Upper Manhattan, which is called Washington Heights. And then in 1941, the war took place with Pearl Harbor. I was 16 at the time. I had dropped out of high school to go to work because the finances were difficult. And as a result, I ended up volunteering as a first aid person on ambulances in New York City for a year.
Oh, interesting.
And I had to take a course for the American Red Cross. And up until that time, my major interest was football and baseball and all the sports that you have, and especially the sports that you have in the city, playing in the street, playing stickball, curveball, Chinese handball, and then by the time I was 18, rather than go in on a draft, I volunteered for the Navy. And having had a year's experience in the medical field, for the first time I decided I really wanted to be a medical corpsman.
Wow.
So I was trained as a medical corpsman, was trained with being an operating room technician, and a group of us that were on the East Coast after our training, we didn't want to stay out of action, so we volunteered to get going, and they shipped us to the West Coast, and we were distributed to the Navy, the Marines, aboard ship, and I ended up attached as a corpsman with the Seabees at Port Hueneme. And from there we went out to Okinawa, and they invaded Okinawa on April 1st, 1945. I believe it was Easter Sunday. And then we arrived there about 6 weeks later. And the war ended after the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. And it turned out that a few of us were able to get to Shanghai for a little holiday, and we saw what Shanghai was like as they were preparing for their war against the communists. So when we came back to America and was discharged in 1946, I met my brother Tom, who was a year and a half younger than I was, and he was also in the Navy aboard a ship, and we got discharged at the same time in New York City.
Lovely.
So from there, I had to go back and get my certificate for finishing high school, and then with the GI Bill, I was blessed with many other returning veterans, and a Welsh lady recommended that I go to the University of Vermont, where she was a graduate and had become the head librarian for the children's section of the New York Library. So I think the rest was history. I spent 4 years in Vermont in undergraduate to get a bachelor's degree. I was involved in singing, football, fishing, other activities. And then I was blessed that Vermont had a medical school. It was one of the old medical schools. It was accepted, and ended up spending 4 years in Burlington and graduated in June of 1954. And 3 of us decided we wanted to go and do what's called a rotating internship, in which you spend a month in different specialties, so taking care of general medicine, pediatric surgery, and the various subspecialties. But I had decided by then that I was going to be a pediatrician. And that's where I met Sally. She was just graduating as a nurse. And so I finished my first year in Buffalo and then went to Buffalo Children's Hospital for pediatrics. And then we got married in 1956. And after graduating from the 1 year in pediatrics, went to New York City for New York Cornell and spent a year during the 2nd year of pediatrics. And at that time got inspired by pediatric blood and cancer. And so we rotated through Sloan Kettering Hospital, which was one of the major hospitals. And it turned out my mother, in the meantime, had, my dad died while I was in college of a heart attack at 61. And so my mother was asked to come to California, to Los Angeles, where his oldest brother was living. And he had been married without children, and he'd had a stroke, so she came out to help. And so when I was looking to do a specialty in hematology oncology, I came to California and looked at Stanford, looked at University of California, San Francisco, and USC, and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And a Dr. Sturgeon was one of the outstanding directors of pediatric hematology oncology, so I said I'd like to spend a year or more with him. And that's how we ended up in Los Angeles.
In children's.
And at Children's Hospital. And then afterwards, we went and I started practice as a general pediatrician in Santa Barbara. And Sally, having been born in Buffalo, thought she had gone to heaven. But at the same time, I was still coming back to Children's Hospital, working in the clinics. And then I was offered in 1960 a position on the faculty of the University of Southern California, which is now called the Keck School of Medicine, and also full-time at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And at that time, in the 58 to 60 period, after finishing the 2 years in private practice, that childhood cancer was still a very fatal illness. And for leukemia in the 50s, the average child would only live 3 to 5 months and usually died of infection or bleeding. And it turned out that our division was part of a cooperative national study group that were testing some of the new medicines that were becoming available. And so to fast forward, it turned out from a survival of less than 2 or 3% for childhood leukemia, by the year 1990, 95, 85% of the children were being cured.
Wow.
And it also meant that because of the drugs, surgery, and radiation, that these were new drugs that we didn't really know all of the adverse effects. And so then it became obvious that there were multiple complications with the different drugs and the different types of cancer, be it brain, kidney, bone. And so it turned out that in 1990 I retired, and I've been blessed that I've been able to follow on a regular basis wherever I go survivors of childhood cancer. So I feel that I'm a survivor in terms of being an octogenarian, but my patients are surviving 15 years, 30 years, and the oldest survivor is 63 years old, and we saw her when she was 11 years old, and she now lives up in Arroyo Grande in California. She had leukemia at 11, and in her early 40s she developed her second cancer, acute myelogenous lymphoma, and then 3 years ago she developed a rare tumor of her ovary, which contained a hormone-secreting tumor called testosterone, and another rare tumor. She's married with 4 children now, 2 adopted, a number of grandchildren. And so Sally and I have had a life that's been exposed to all of the joy and the happiness and the sadness of life dealing with cancer. And as a result of that, I think it was in the early 1980, while biking in Griffith Park, I met saw the Pickwick ice rink, and met some young ice skater. And so then I became a press photographer for the Toluca Lake newspaper, and for the next 20 years was able to travel the world, United States, Canada, and Europe, covering the ice skaters. And
when was this again?
From 1980.
Were you retired at that point?
No. I was.
You were still practicing.
I was still practicing every day.
Teaching.
And so as a result, this was in many ways
A hobby.
it was a hobby, but it was also kind of probably therapy. Because here I'm dealing with
All these
young,
horrible-
athletic, world-class ice skaters, the Tiffany Chins of the world, and Brian Bortanos. And after a while, I was getting more questions about the world of ice skating than of cancer.
Right.
So-
Terrific therapy.
So it turns out that since I've been retired, my wife and I have been very involved in our church, St. James Episcopal Church. With the AIDS epidemic, I was in 1985 appointed to the Los Angeles County Medical Association, and the epidemic was just starting then. And it turned out I tried to get the doctors to become aware of it, and they thought that was just a limited infection in the gay population. But we were seeing it subsequently in children with hemophilia that were receiving blood transfusion. So in the middle of 1980, I was appointed the first chairman of the County Medical Association's Committee on AIDS, and we ended up having our first major attempt in education besides television and radio in which we were planning to put 100 billboards throughout the Los Angeles. And the billboards would say, if you can't say no, use rubbers, condoms, help prevent AIDS. Well, it turned out that the Pope was coming to town.
Uh-oh.
And as we were negotiating with the Archdiocese, they asked us, could we please wait until the Pope had finished his tour with his Pope-mobile, because they did not want a picture of the Pope and a sign on a billboard in Spanish talking about AIDS. And
That implied birth control,
and implied
regardless
birth
of the
control.
fact it was disease control.
It was disease control
Yeah.
and not birth control.
And what year was that?
1985.
That was really the beginning.
It was right at the beginning. And so then in 1990, when I finally retired, it turned out that I stayed on the committee, and then I got involved on another committee for the Food and Drug Administration for the state of California and other states, which was called AIDS Fraud Health Committee.
AIDS fraud, what?
AIDS Fraud Health.
Health.
Fraudulent medicines or treatments to cure AIDS, which has now become a chronic illness, like leukemia and cancer, and adverse effects from their survival, but still no vaccine to cure it. So I think Sally's been blessed in that she stayed on with the church group, many close friends and support, and then it turns out she was very involved in the county museum, the music center, and other volunteer programs. Our children were growing up at the same time.
You had two.
We
Eric
have two
and
sons,
James.
James, who is now 39 and is a very excellent carpenter and home remodeler.
That's the fellow I met last
Yes,
week when I met
that's
you.
right. And then the other son, Eric, went to Harvard High School, and then he went to Williams College in Massachusetts, and then he became an Episcopal priest, met his wife in the seminary in New York. They have two lovely children in upstate New York, and they have their own church. Now, with all of life's happiness, there's also some sadness. And a few years ago, Sally started showing early evidence of some memory loss. And she had trouble remembering how to get to a home as a visiting nurse, whereas before she could do it. And then she was secretary for the medical faculty wives, and simple announcements that she had to write up, she could not complete. And then when we had our 50th wedding anniversary 3 years ago, we almost canceled it, but we decided she would be okay. And in the last 2 years, it turned out that her memory just went downhill rapidly, and 6 months ago we had her admitted to a nursing home in Glendale. And so as a result, our sons have seen her there. The two Episcopal priests were out for the Episcopal Convention this summer, and they were able to visit Sally in the nursing home. And our friends, when I had to go back for my 55th medical class reunion in June in Vermont, were able, along with our friends from church, to visit Sally every day. So it turns out that even though she didn't know who they were, the staff at the nursing home was amazed that she had so many friends.
Yeah.
So there must be a question or two that you might have. I mean, since you
How
brought
many
her-
years were you at Children's Hospital before 90 when you retired?
I was actually in training there for a year before 1960, from 1957 to 58. Then I practiced in Santa Barbara for 2 years. And then I spent 30 years doing the pediatric hematology and oncology, but I was also involved in training the first year medical students, which was very exciting and challenging. And then I retired in December 1990.
So that's almost 50 years. No, like
30 years.
30 years.
30 years, yeah.
And were you teaching at USC part of that time?
Yes,
The
well,
whole time?
we were full-time
Full-time.
faculty on the staff of Keck, USC School of Medicine.
Right.
So the dealing with the medical students, since they were just fresh and eager, that we had the ability and the option that we could take them to any and all of the hospitals in USC and to other facilities throughout the city. So we took them to nursing homes, to chemical dependency centers. And one of the centers in Long Beach turned out to be a center with a doctor from Atlanta, Georgia, who was one of the pioneers. And it turns out that her doctors and her therapy for the alcoholic and drug dependency became a magnet for the military because they had a significant problem. So they sent their doctors for training. And one of her doctors that was trained in Long Beach became the first doctor at the Betty Ford Hospital in Palm Springs.
Was that the Long Beach Hospital? A memorial?
No, it wasn't. It was a small hospital in
hospital.
Long Beach, yeah.
Interesting. So when you were in Santa Barbara, did you live in Santa Barbara and commute to Children's Hospital?
I lived in Santa Barbara. I had a beginning practice, and I came once, I think it was once a week to clinic. It might have been once a month. But I stayed in touch, and that led to me being asked when one of the doctors left Children's Hospital to join the staff. And it was really kind of on the cutting edge of childhood cancer. It was, at the time, we didn't realize that medicines were going to become available, and they did, and the drugs that became available.
What year was that, Dr. Ken?
1958 to 60.
Because about that time I was actually tutoring Richard Skelton, Red Skelton's son, and he had leukemia.
That's right, yeah.
So that was around, did you know that?
Yeah, I knew that.
Skelton.
I'm going to stop the camera for just a second.
Okay. So when you came once a month to Children's, then they invited you to be full-time staff. You had to move.
Well, that was a big crisis, I think, as you can imagine.
She loved Santa Barbara.
Sally, we had become the new doctor and wife in town, and so we were invited to a number of
Everything. Right.
And so she became very close with a lot of our friends. And then when I had the invitation after being in Santa Barbara for only 2 years, this was a shock. And I don't think Sally would, if she had to make the decision by herself, would ever have left Santa Barbara. And but we said we'll see how it works out, and it turned out we eventually adjusted and became very close friends with our church friends. And my brother two brothers live in town. One lives in Whittier, other lives in La Cañada. And then we've met a lot of friends through the music center, sports, the football game, USC. And then 12 years ago, I knew Dr. Fleiss from Children's Hospital, and I said, Paul, what do you do for exercise? And he says, well, we hike every morning in Griffith Park. So they met at 6:30, and I joined them. And Sally said, you're crazy getting up in the dark. But then after a while she became curious, and then she joined us, and now we have a whole group of friends that we either hike in the park. Right now, because of Sally requiring a lot of care, I ended up switching to walking along the reservoir. Some of our friends bike, and we have coffee every morning over on Hillhurst. And whenever there's been a celebration, there's a big happening. For 31 years, I was a volunteer doctor at a free clinic at Adams and Figueroa at St. John's Episcopal Church. And I did that really on my spare time on Saturdays when I was off and some Thursday nights. And it turned out that that clinic, which started out as a mom and dad operation in 1965, I had just come back from a hospital ship Hope in Ecuador. And being in a undeveloped country, you realize the tremendous problems as poverty, infection, lack of immunization. And yet when we came back to Los Angeles, the same problem was in Los Angeles in the inner city. And that clinic now has grown to a dozen clinics all over the central Los Angeles, half of them in schools. And I was blessed in the first week of May to have a clinic dedicated as the St. John's Well Child and Family Center as the Dr. Kenneth Williams Community Clinic.
Wow.
Congratulations.
So that led to
Excellent.
another plaque on the wall.
Countless flags.
And as they say,
It's called plaque buildup.
the
I'm sorry,
paths,
dentistry talk.
That's
the paths of lead but to the grave
Oh, thank you.
by Thomas Gray.
exactly. So you chose this house because it was close to Silver Lake, because it was close to Children's Hospital.
It was close to the
5 minutes.
hospital. It turned out early as a hematologist in 1958, 57, 1960. The RH babies had to have blood exchange transfusion. And at that time, the hematologist was the one that would be doing these exchanges. So you had to, when you were on call on the weekend, be available and go down for 2 hours. I think one time I almost went into the wall. I was still half asleep going down the hill. But it turns out that the whole area was in many ways depressing for the young doctors and the young nurses, because just like the recent epidemic with AIDS, dealing with childhood cancer and leukemia was a fatal illness. And it was, here's a group of young doctors and nurses that are going in to help children and having to deal with death and dying. And at the beginning, we did not tell the children, and the family was against being told, and the parents and the grandparents and extended family were having a terrible emotional time, physical time, sometimes leading to divorce. And then eventually we realized that we had to tell the children, and so we started telling them, and the children were better able to deal with it. And Children's has developed a very significant emotional support and play program and art program for the children with cancer. And they are better able to handle it than the parents.
Isn't that something?
Because they're more accepting. They don't have all the built-in learned behavior patterns
That's
that adults have.
In fact, when I was visiting Jenny, she's 63 now.
Right.
And it turned out that when she was taking care of her 2 grandchildren, 5 and 1-year-old in the crib, I was visiting her and having lunch, and the little 5-year-old boy said to me, "Dr. Williams, what kind of aspirin did you give Grandma to make her better?" And obviously Grandma had a big smile and I had a big smile.
Brilliant.
What kind of aspirin?
Yeah.
I like the kinds.
The magic pill.
The magic pill.
Yeah.
Right.
Not as strong as some of the pills that we were using.
And now, I think there's different kinds of chemotherapy and radiation
Yes.
that have progressed. So you keep on top of that? Do you go to the classes or
I-
seminars or
I
whatever?
go to seminars. We are actually on a committee that was started over 30 years ago when I had a young 3-year-old girl with leukemia, and the father was in the radio field, and it turned out he wanted to start some fundraising to help leukemia and lymphoma, and so they started a radiothon. Then they became a telethon, and it turned out that this was very successful, and it turned out that now in the last 3 years we are involved in a program trying to provide help for the children with leukemia in Mongolia, because they had been under the regime of the Russians, and now that they are independent, they've had to fly their children sometimes to Seoul, Korea to get treatment, or to Japan. So we've been able to get medical supplies and an up-to-date microscope, and we are having doctors from Children's Hospital that have been going there to provide help medically. We're now trying to get the medicines that would help maybe improve their survival to close to 50%.
Wow.
So there's always opportunities.
Were you ever in touch with the adolescent medicine at Children's Hospital?
Yes.
I know, Dr. McKenzie or any of those people?
Dr. McKenzie is part of this committee, and he's part of
Because
the
I know
team
he
that
went to Mongolia
has gone to Mongolia.
and he's come
yeah.
back
And
with
he's come
slides.
back.
I've seen his slides.
Yeah. So,
So, and he has classes for his interns on Fridays, so I go to those sometimes.
so you go to the
I
Friday
still
class.
go to the
yeah.
Friday classes, which is fun.
Well, that's the adolescent is
Right.
also a child with is a significant problem in terms of denial, and many times having them stay on their medicine is a problem, or having a parent who feels that the medicines are too toxic
Right.
to risk the child, and the
Because-
parents not realizing that they're dealing with medicines that can potentially cure their child
Okay.
as opposed to toxic side effects.
Are you talking about people here or in Mongolia or both?
No, I'm talking about around the world,
Around the world.
but especially what we were dealing with children. And then the other question would be alternate care such as is available in Tijuana and around the world. And this is
The
called
apricot kernels and the
this is called health fraud, and our
Fraud.
committee that was the California AIDS Fraud Task Force became 3 years ago the California Health Fraud Task Force, because people are
it's like the malaria fraud in
Yeah.
other countries, that they're giving them the pills and selling them, and it looks exactly like the same boxes, but it's just salt or something.
well in South Africa they denied, the head of the South African government was denying that there was an AIDS virus,
Right.
and now there's a new ruler in, and he is accepting the fact that there is help, and pregnant women, if they have the AIDS virus,
Can prevent their
can
children.
have a close to 100% chance with appropriate treatment of preventing the child from developing AIDS.
Right.
Otherwise, there'd be 1 chance in 4 that the child could develop AIDS.
Okay. So let's get back to when you moved to Silver Lake and you moved to Mitchell-Torina Street, and there were the nuns that lived across the street. They called it the convent,
Yes,
which was a 28-acre compound, something like that, with
5.5
several buildings.
acres.
5.5?
Yes.
Okay, it's been exaggerated. But you knew the nuns there, and
Well, we knew the nuns, and we were blessed that they let a lot of the neighbors use the swimming pool.
because I know I took my grandkids up to the playhouse, which was the size of this room,
Yeah,
to play every Saturday, and they play basketball up there.
and then young James, when he was about 11 or 12, was starting to get into golf, and one day he went over to their backyard, and as he was golfing, he hit from the green towards the estate, and it was really where the chapel was with their stained glass window. And the ball hit the green, then the cement, and went through the stained glass window. And I like to embellish the story by saying that it fell in the communion cup. But 10 minutes later, he dropped his golf club and ran home. And then the nun came over with the golf club and said, could it be possible that James was playing golf in the backyard? And then James was a devil of a risk taker, so he would be climbing the big trees in our area. And then one time when he was learning to use his skateboard, he ended up going down one of our steep neighbors' driveway, and obviously he didn't realize the physics of speed and the weight that he had, and he fell off his skateboard and did a compound fracture of his arm, which required a visit to Children's Hospital for treatment.
Fortunately, you had a connection there.
Which I had a connection.
Yeah. Your oldest son?
Our oldest son has been, he came down and I had both my children work the Rose Bowl, mainly just to expose them to selling.
Right.
And I don't think either one of them enjoyed it, but they did it. And then my youngest brother is a lawyer who worked in the Long Beach port area, lives in La Cañada, and so each of the sons worked with a law firm. And then Eric, when I was involved in the clinic on Saturday, he ended up as a volunteer in the clinic, and that led to him getting a prize when he graduated from Harvard School because of community involvement.
Right.
He also became TB positive, which required a little treatment.
Oh my gosh.
And then he had made up his mind that when he went to college at Williams College, that he wanted to become a priest. And we just let him make the decision where he wanted to go to college. He did not want to look at the University of Vermont, where I graduated from. He could have gone free at the University of Southern California, which he didn't want to attend.
Free?
Yeah, because if you work there, you get 1
But
year
being
per...
part of the faculty,
Yeah.
you could have a free lunch
Yep.
and no tuition.
But then the kids don't want to go.
Yeah.
It drives you crazy. So where did he end up?
So he ended up at Williams College, and his advisors said that you wouldn't get in, but he wrote his essay. His marks were good. His SAT obviously was up to their standards, and it turned out that he decided to go in early, and they accepted him, and he loved it. I mean, it was a small college in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, right.
And it turned out that his address was Eric Williams, Williams College, Williams Dorm, Williamsville, Massachusetts.
That's great.
And then he was suggested that he go teach for a couple of years before applying for the seminary. And then he met his wife in the seminary, who had studied to be an economist at Yale and went on a mission to Africa. And they subsequently, when they were ordained, courted each other. And then they got married, and they now have 2 lovely granddaughters, 8 and 11, who are into music, skiing, soccer, and swimming.
And he lives in New York.
They live in upstate New York. Yes.
Running.
Okay, so your kids come and visit you for Christmas? Or
No, they
holidays?
don't.
They don't.
Since they are priests,
Yeah.
they are very busy
That's
over
right.
the Christmas
Can't take
season.
the time
So
off.
we end up usually, Sally and I would visit them in upstate New York, and then Sally is from Buffalo, so her sister has 6 sons and 13 grandchildren.
Wow.
And so we usually include those
Kids.
2 places which are 60 miles from each other. And then in Jamestown, New York, is the Chautauqua Institute that is a combination of Disneyland, elder hostel, youth and sports,
Right.
dance, drama.
It's still in existence?
It's very successful. It's a 9-week program. We usually stay for a week at the Episcopal Cottage.
Lovely.
And so as a result, our visits are in the summertime. And then it was difficult for the girls, the granddaughters, to understand that Grandma was not remembering things.
Right.
But so they saw her as she was changing. And then I had to watch about my activities as far as in the last 3 years or so to not be at risk for being injured, because I've had sports injuries.
Have you?
And so it turned out that I stopped skiing with Sally when I was 80, and I'm hoping now to go back to cross country or downhill skiing, downhill
No
snowshoeing.
snowboarding.
Not snowboarding, no. But we've enjoyed the Silver Lake area. It has changed dramatically. When we arrived here 44 years ago, there was a lot of older people and not as many children, but they did have a very good nursery school, and so both children attended the nursery school. And then I became on the board of St. James when they were starting a school with Mr. Joe DeBell providing the money. So both of our sons went to the elementary school at St. James, which has now grown from a 1-room classroom to over 300 children.
Is that
It's
the
a
one
very
over in Echo
successful.
Park?
No, this is in Wilshire Boulevard.
Wilshire, that's
Yeah.
right.
Right, 2 blocks west of Weston.
Okay.
Now Silver Lake is very upscale. People used to say, where is Silver Lake?
Right.
But now with all the younger and not so young parents, the reservoir is a hub for baby carriages, parents, even fathers carrying their children, their dog. And then it turns out it used to be a pill hill. There were so many doctors that lived here, but when Robert Kennedy was shot at the Ambassador, I was on call that night, and one of the doctors on the hill was a neurosurgeon, and he was called to the hospital to provide whatever care was necessary because it was a fatal assassination.
We interviewed a young fellow who was on Kennedy's staff and was in attendance the night, and he was 6 feet away from where Kennedy was.
Oh, he was, yeah.
Yeah, that's the father and son from Los Feliz. Interesting.
So it was like Dr. Hill here because there were so many doctors, and I'd heard when I moved here in I guess it was 74, that it was Russian Hill, like Mitchell Torina was Michelle Torina, I don't know, but that there were so many movie moguls up here, but all the movie moguls were doctors, right? What you're saying.
Well, there were movie people
movie
here as
people
well. I
too.
mean, it was a cross section, but
It was.
a lot of people from Disney. There, one woman down the hill with 2 young children has a co-partner of a film company in Burbank. We've been adopted since I'm a retired pediatrician by neighbors who children have their own doctor. But one of the families, 2 Christmases in a row, that they had a fever and a child crisis, and so we got called and ended up with a nice bottle of wine.
There you go. So, but there are the other. So you walk around the lake now,
Yes.
and then you meet for breakfast.
And we meet
dinner,
at the alcove for coffee.
for coffee.
And then we've got a lot of celebrity friends and some that are not celebrities.
Do you remember celebrities around here living here?
Celebrities that live in the neighborhood.
Right.
And it turns out a lot of them are in the film business. And it turned out that they're a very compassionate group, and they've provided a lot of support for me. And it's been very difficult for many of them to deal with Sally, especially when I went back east for my reunions,
Right.
for them to see her change. And the minister at the church was bringing her communion with a very good friend of ours, and he was having trouble dealing with it because his father was losing his memory.
Oh.
And I think I look at Alzheimer's as that it's really the big dark hole that we were in with cancer
In 50s.
and childhood cancer. But
Early 50s.
the brain is very complex, and trying to understand it. And last night I was at a dinner at USC for the Christmas choral, and there was a family sitting next to me, and they said, "We met you before, Dr. Williams." And their child was at the hospital with a brain tumor in the 70s, and she died.
Oh.
And so it turns out that when you meet families in the 30 years ago, if I met a family, I'd have trouble remembering
Right.
what their name was and was their child alive or dead. Because you'd meet them
Probably
in different places, such as the airport or in the city at an event.
You
social
probably
event.
worked with thousands of children and thousands of
did.
parents.
We had one of the largest children's cancer in the United States.
Now, is that the Sabin Institute?
The Sabin now
Is that
Saban Institute
Saban.
really is a research building
Okay.
funded by the Saban family.
Is that for cancer too? Or is
It's
it
for
just
all
everything?
kinds of,
Okay.
you have to realize that children sees the whole gamut of
Right.
genetic, acquired, developmental illness. It's a very complex place that still needs support for completing the building.
Yeah.
That the new building to meet earthquake requirements is 80% completed.
I thought it was finished. It's not done yet.
It's
Still
not done
going.
yet.
Wow. It's amazing. So I was just thinking too about the type of people that were living here when you moved here 44 years ago. That was through the 60s, and so you went through the whole hippie experience, you're gonna call it that, and the protesters and all that.
Well,
And now it's more yuppie.
it's more upscale,
Upscale.
and there's still some afterglow effect from the hippie revolution.
Which is what, the art?
And you have to realize that the AIDS epidemic was a significant impact in California, because the first cases were reported from California and from New York City. And in California it was predominantly homosexual transmission. In New York City there was more drug as well as homosexual transmission. And as a result, I remember going to a meeting at UCLA in which this was in the, within maybe the first 8 years of the epidemic, and it turned out they had their first conference of women with AIDS, and the women had really been neglected.
Right.
And it was also at the same time that Magic Johnson announced that he was HIV positive because he was trying to buy part ownership of the Lakers. And Lloyd's of London said, we want all of the tests done, including the AIDS test. So that's how it was found. And people see him and have a hard time understanding that he had AIDS, yet you realize that it's now like a
Medicine.
chronic illness because so many drugs have been developed and a lot of research has been done to understand, but still no vaccine.
Right.
So the Silver Lake area has had its share of deaths from
And changes.
and changes.
Yeah. And right now, I think it's more accepted if you have, not only homosexuality is more accepted, but the AIDS, if you have AIDS. I know the 2 apartments over on Sunset, the Laguna and the other one, are low income for, they had to actually get the age pushed down to 55 rather than 65 because so many young people, a younger man had AIDS that were disabled too.
Yeah.
So
Was this a hospice-like place? Or?
it's actually apartment buildings.
Oh, apartment
It's
building.
you know where the bridge is, where
Oh, I
water
know.
goes under? Those 2
Yeah.
apartment buildings, they're low income for.
Well, in fact,
Disabled.
I have gone to a support group at the Assistant League for caregivers for Alzheimer's disease, and a few months ago, it turned out the rental facility was not available, so we now are meeting twice a month at the Gay and Lesbian Senior Citizen on Ivor in Hollywood. So this was the first senior citizens gay and lesbian housing project.
Organization.
So life is changing, as is our dealing with life struggles, be it health, the United States, the war, Iraq and Afghanistan, and youth,
So
education.
So tell me about healthcare. What your
It's-
opinion is about healthcare. Where is it going?
I think the healthcare is so complex. I was on a committee in Sacramento going every January on insuring the uninsured project. And 2 years ago, they said that they would have it passed in California, and they were not able to pass the law. And I think that the various components, the healthcare industry, the doctors, the pharmacy, the insurance company, the government, the issues of 40% of the population in the United States is uninsured, which is a disaster for a country that should be one of the leaders in the world, whereas we are low down in the level of health care available.
Right.
If you have money and if you have insurance, you're okay.
So that's rapidly being worked on, but we don't know where it's going to go.
Well, I would wonder about the rapidly. It's like a glacier that there's been a lot of promise is going to take place. And I just read in the Times today that the California Medical Association is going to vote against the bill which they have in the Senate.
Well, one of the reasons for that, I think, is part of is the expense. They don't have the cost controls aspect of it. They have the coverage and they have the doctors, but they don't have any way of controlling the expense yet.
Well, if you think of the amount of money that has been spent over the last few years with the war in Iraq, and now that we're going to have 100,000 soldiers
130.
in Afghanistan, and what it cost, and we're saying that, well,
$1
we
million
can't afford,
a
we
man.
cannot afford health care. That is ridiculous.
Well, we'll get there.
Okay, the
This
camera is
man.
running.
So I guess you could tell us a little bit about the Silver Lake, because you actually saw the lake empty, right?
Yes, we saw it empty,
Have
and
no
we-
bird balls. I guess you could see the bird balls from here at the other side.
Yeah, but it turned out that growing up, our children were exposed to a lot of sports activities, either participating in baseball. They were involved with the church, with the being ordained, being baptized, and we were exposed to the various restaurants, the Trader Joe's and Palermo's, and but we were very active in the sense that we were going on hiking trips to the Sierras. We were biking with the children, usually down by the beach. Both Eric and James and Sally were skiers, and we ended up skiing locally at Mount Waterman, Big Bear, Sierra, Tahoe, and I was involved in pediatric education at the resorts up in the Sierras and Mammoth. And so in our travel we were involved with going to the Caribbean. We went on a cruise of the Mediterranean. We visited relatives in Canada, where Sally's family is from on her mother's side. So the children were exposed to a lot of
Travel
travel,
activities.
and I think that Eric complained that we did not give him piano lessons.
Oh, God.
But when we came back from a USC medical course in Hawaii, where he was able to meet children from around the world, and England and Wales, he was asked to sing in a choir of 12 boys with Neil Diamond in the movie Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And so he got paid for that, and he became a very good singer.
Wow.
And 2 weeks ago he was singing in upstate New York at a church community, Fuade Requiem, in which he was the baritone soloist with the soprano singer.
Lovely.
Sally said she never could sing, and James likes to sing, but his is more cowboy. Yeah. And I enjoy classical music, and we've been involved with the Music Center, Copen School of Arts, the USC Thornton School of Music. So that Los Angeles is a wonderful area for entertainment
3 minutes.
and involvement.
Good. That's
Okay, well, thank you so much for talking to us and sharing your life with us. I really enjoyed interviewing you. And it sounds like, you're such a successful doctor and so many years in Silver Lake that we really got a flavor of the advantages of not just Silver Lake, but Los Angeles, and all the different, abilities that you have to go anywhere. You can go from the mountains to the sea, and
Well, it's interesting that Silver
all
Lake
over the
was
world from
looked
here.
at as a lesser community like Echo
Exactly.
Park 45 years ago, and
Right.
now it's one of the upscale in places, and we now have a large group of restaurants, and we have a wonderful community that's very close.
Right.
And we've got Tom LaBonge.
And we have our first Eddie. So
Okay.
thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care.
very good. Thank you, Doctor.
The house that you're looking at is my mother's house in North Wales. My brothers and I were born in South Wales, where my dad was a coal miner. We have a picture of
That's hers.
when I was born with my mother and father in South Wales, and this must have been after the baptism. Of the famous handmade shawl. And then on the next picture is a picture of Sally and I going out to a formal event with our two sons, James, who's about 12, who was in St. James School, and Eric, who was 15 at Harvard High School.
I went the wrong way here. Okay.
Okay, and it turns out that there is a picture of Sally and myself with one of our granddaughters, and now the two granddaughters are 8
Here's the two granddaughters.
and 11, and they both are musicians, cello, violin, piano, and into sports.
This is two pictures of Sally.
And
That's
this
Sally's
is Sally
parents.
when she was graduating from nursing school in Buffalo.
Cute.
And this is Sally at a benefit in our house. And now Sally is in her own world with Alzheimer's. And this was our 50th medical class reunion in Vermont.
And that's the two of you?
The two of us.
And that was only 5 years ago, right?
2 minutes. All right, here we are on the deck of Dr. Kin's house with a view from Glendale over his shoulder. I'm going to do a pan. This is down below. You can see the lake and the dam,
Reservoir.
the reservoir, and across the way. Hold on a
The
second.
lights are
You get all the fireworks here.
Where's Dodger Stadium?
I see the fireworks.
right over the
too.
next
where the
ravine.
palm trees are.
Yeah.
I don't think the camera
Yeah, no,
will
no,
pick
it
all that
won't.
up. We can barely see the Civic Center, and I'm going to pass by a cypress tree, and then there's through the haze is downtown Los
And then you were
Angeles.
saying, he was saying that Tom LaBonge saw him drive.
Tell us about your Mustang.
Well, Sally, 44 years ago, purchased a yellow Mustang convertible, and it has survived 44 years.
Same
And-
age as his oldest son, right?
2 months ago, as I was driving down the hill to go walking around the lake, Tom LaBonge said, "I need a picture of Ken in the yellow Mustang." So it turns out that we're lucky to have survived, and I think Sally, while she was driving that Mustang, must have been asked 10,000 times, "Do you want to sell that Mustang, lady?"